Hello, hello. Welcome to today's episode of Awaken the Feminine Within. We are going to get into today what the signs are and how you can start recognizing that your relationship might be leading to divorce. I have with me today Tony Black, and I actually discovered him on TikTok. He is amazing, and he has had a very interesting story that is really, really, really powerful, really, really, really necessary for both men and for women to hear. And so I asked him if he was interested in doing a podcast. He, of course, said yes. And so I'm very excited to have him here today. And Tony, tell us a little bit about yourself and just, your journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miriam. And first off, I love the content of your podcast and dig your style. And I think what's the information that you're putting out was beautiful. But yeah, for me, it's like, I think seeing a normal story in relationships. I had been married for 10 years. I have 3 kids. And, in January, my wife came to me and she was like, Tony, I'm turning 40 and done. I'm unhappy. I want a divorce, and I, like so many men, that came as a sideswipe. I didn't see the signs, coming, mainly because I was so consumed with like working and fighting and really missing the whole mark of how to be more conscious or connected with my wife and our relationship, and when that happened, I took accountability. I wasn't convicted in this situation, and taking accountability, I was really able to like dive in, right, and understand like what did I do wrong, what were my shortcomings, like where did I fail my wife in our relationship, and it's quite painful work, it's a painful task to like really dive in, and there's this beautiful Sufi poet, his name's Jerome, and he has a quote that says, "The wound is where the light ends," and that really summarizes like this journey within. Without that wound, I would have never known to go in, right? Because I was navigating like unconsciously, just unaware, with this unawareness, right? Thinking that everything's great on paper, it's fine. I'm dividing. We have this beautiful family, everything's great, but what was underneath, right? Which I didn't have the awareness to be able to go under, There were a lot of like subtle hints and signs, like looking back, you can connect the dots, that I just wasn't able to recognize in the moment, So moving forward, it's like, how do I stay consciously connected? And how do I, and continue to improve upon like this awareness, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a painful awakening, and that's really, I would have to say before the syllables of divorce even we left her mouth that January night, it was like, "Hey, where have I been? Like, what's going on? How did this just happen?" It was like an almost instantaneously I woke up, right, to like this different paradigm, this different perspective, like how did it get to this point, And unfortunately, I think for a lot of men, that's like a very similar scenario where we don't wake up seeing enough for our feminine partners, when there are these signs in our relationship, that they're asking us to grow with them, and we just are unable to see this. Yeah.
What do you feel like, looking back into the 10 years of your relationship, what did you feel like? Because, you're TikToker. I think the one that I discovered you on, you were talking about how, her feminine glow was fading, like throughout the relationship. What do you feel like were the things that kind of distanced you from her, like overall, like, when we had talked on the phone, you had talked about, your career changes, like in the beginning of the relationship. Do you feel like it was that? Do you feel like it was something else that kind of like created distance or created that autonomy that led to that, just like, oh, I'm not really, you're so focused on one thing that it kind of like created this like little invisible wall that just was like, oh, I'm just not going to really notice my partner as much, or because you don't have space to do so. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. And yes. So when I first, met my wife, like the first time I saw her, I was like, oh, that's her, And oddly enough, like we started to bump into each other in the coffee shops, in the restaurant, on the street. It's just like boom. After I saw her that first time, it's just like, next thing you know, she's at my slipstream, and every other day I'm bumping into her. And finally one day I was like, "You want to go get some deep. And we were together every night since, and it's this, immense, like, beautiful connection, right? And and we definitely glowed in our feminine. It was just this beautiful sight and this beautiful experience to experience, and looking back, there was layers to it, as you know, right? We ended up, our first daughter was born. I started a business. Then our son was born, right? So it was a lot, I looking back, and in that specific TikTok, I said, like, her glow was contingent on how I was showing up for her, right? But also at the same time, like, happiness is an inside job, but I can see where my lack of leadership, to answer your question, is really what, from my perspective, was what was dimming the light, right? My lack of leadership in our relationship, my inability to be aware in the moment, look, she went on that first date with me because she saw in me somebody that can lead her to places in her heart that she couldn't go herself, And then here we are, like, all these responsibilities being, toppled on top of us. And I lost sight of that, and it was just circumstance. It wasn't anything done intentional, right? But then, like, for me, and personally speaking, I just found myself in this groove where this is working, right? And I continued down that groove, right? Unable to, like, look and see and have that wide lens of, like, what was really happening,
Yeah. Okay. So do you feel like in the beginning of the marriage or the relationship, you were able to lead, and then at some point it, like, kind of dropped off?
Yes. Yeah.
And what do you feel like is the thing that kind of caused that to drop off?
Just the responsibilities of building a business, right? And what's underneath that is that, I'd initially came out to Los Angeles for acting and writing, and that was, like, my passion and my purpose, and when my first daughter was born, I bought this restaurant, because I felt the need to provide. And but within that dynamic of that business partnership, it's like we continue to open more restaurants, right? Where my heart wasn't in it at all, but I wasn't, aware enough or mature enough to be like, you know what, I'm okay. You guys can go continue to open more restaurants. I'm okay with one, and that's enough for me to sustain my family. And now I can go pursue my passions and my purpose, right? So here we are, and I take accountability for this where I didn't speak my truth, right? I wasn't, it was mainly because, like, well, like, I can make more money for my family, right? That's what was on the forefront of my mind. How can I provide bigger for my family, even though it hurts me, right? And that's really where the resentment started to build. And it wasn't the resentment towards my wife or towards my kids. It was the resentment towards myself that I was unable to see, right? I was unable to understand it, because, look, everything's great. Like, we have, we're able to afford this and that and this, even though I don't feel great on the inside, we still have this financial freedom. So it's okay, right? Where now, looking back, I'm like, no, that was never okay. Like, I, had a responsibility to my own heart and my own well-being, right? And in regards to, like, the masculine and feminine polarity, it's like, the feminine energy wants the leaves in their masculine, wants, the masculine to have purpose and passion, right? And I wasn't showing up with purpose and passion, right? To me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that, I heard from somebody else, it's like men are trained on a woman's relationship with a man is dictated by what he can do, not who he is. And so it gets this weird, like, women want XYZ, not realizing that if she gets XYZ, she'll lose a massive part of why she wants that in the first place. And so it can be really, and I feel like that's very bred into society and just how men feel about themselves, because they're like, oh, my feelings don't really matter. What matters is that I'm able to give, which is a very essential part of masculine energy, but you can't give without self, right? Or like, you can't give from nothing, just like women can't, give or do or whatever from a place of like insecurity. It doesn't work. So it's really, I see a pattern like in your, story, like, and also like my husband has experienced that, this very much like, oh, well, and in a way it's very robotic. It's very like, okay, well, cool. I can, like, just like you said, we have financial freedom, but what else do I have? Like, I have a family, but do I have me? Like, because if you don't have you, I mean, isn't that the point of living? Is to like have a sense of self, to have a sense of happiness, to be able to have joy, and to be able to have all the other things as well, because they're so connected and so necessary. I mean, it makes total sense that you would lose a sense of like being able to give or prioritize or see your wife. Like the visibility would have just dropped off because you were so focused on, well, I just feel crappy. Even if you weren't aware of it, it was like the subconscious, oh shoot, I guess I'm just going to go into autopilot and like build the businesses and provide financial freedom. But I think your subconscious was also like, there has to be more to life than this. Yeah.
Over a year ago, so when things were starting to kind of kick in for me, and I'm like, why do I think I'm down? But I wasn't able to bring that to the table for my wife, because I was really like afraid, like, hey, I want to sell everything and start over, but there's no plan B. How are we going to do that? And I didn't have really the mindset to bring that to my wife at the time, because I didn't want her to freak out. Like, oh, well, what are we going to, you know what I'm saying? So well, I just kept it. I kept it, and then when the divorce came, I was like, okay, like I'm going to look at it, and it gave me the opportunity to be like, okay, I'm done. I'm selling these restaurants, and I'm devoting my time to my family and to my kids. And self-discovery work, but how it's like, for me, it's like, I look back at that guy that I was a year ago, right? And what was keeping me from pulling the trigger then? What was keeping me from like, because I was that awareness on my own without having that divorce that woke me up, right? So it's like, that's, for me, it's like, how do we get men to understand, the language that our feminine partners are trying to talk to us about? Like, how do we get men to understand, that, that their purpose and passion and their well-being also evokes, passion in our relationships, right? And it's, and that's what I've been really kind of like looking into and really looking into myself. It's like, how do I continue to stay consciously in contact with, my source, and so that I don't miss these subtle little cues that have been presented to me for years, and it's, it's with the help of the feminine energy, it's like, that's where the information was coming from. It's like, I can look back, right, and easily acknowledge that, my ex-wife, and we're not divorced yet, but I can easily look back and see that she, played such a big role in my spiritual growth, right? That she was an architect of spiritual growth, in such a massive, like, profound way. And I wish that I could go back, and give her this version of me, but obviously it's like, I continue to show up for her and our kids, and she feels the change, right? And I haven't really told her, hey, I'm doing this work, I'm doing that work, I'm doing this, right? I just want to show up for her so that she can feel it. She can feel the change, right? Because I just feel like if I'm like, hey, I'm doing all this work, it might lose its power. It might lose its like sensibility to it. So
yeah, it's really, from your story, I'm seeing this, if men are not lit up and able to see themselves, they cannot light up and see their woman. Ultimately, is really like, and it really is, there's no guidebook. There's no, I feel like masculinity in and of itself has changed so drastically, just as, femininity and feminism has changed drastically over the last like 100, 200 years, that it's really, I really honestly do feel this like in the collective as well, that men and women are reaching another level of like evolution that is really incredibly beautiful in my mind, because we are like the most self-aware I think that we have ever been, like in the history of humanity, which is really incredible. But it's also painful because, it's like I do feel, and I see this in the work that my husband's doing. I'm seeing this in the work that you're doing. Like men are wanting to have, like we'll call them old school for lack of a better word, like to be able to provide, to be able to, do those very chivalrous things, but also show up emotionally for themselves and for their partners. And they're carving this new, incredibly beautiful and sacred space for men and for their women. And, I'm seeing the other side of it where it's like, yeah, let's work on for women to get out of their masculine side so their men can show up in that space, right? It's like, you being able to build this really incredible, healthy relationship where the woman is willing to hold space for her man's emotion, and a man is willing and easily able to see, his woman's emotions and not feel like that they're in the way, or that they're, a trigger for him, or that they might cause, friction, or so on and so forth. And so it's really awesome to see, even though that the, catalyst was incredibly painful. It's just, I like even just listening to your story is so beautiful to see and to watch, and to see, it's like a flower unfolding, because it's like, oh, we're, like you were telling me on the phone the other day, documenting your story and your thoughts on TikTok, you can see how much is resonating with other men. I'm sure that you're seeing in the comments that it's like, oh, shoot. And women as well. Women are like, well, we need more men to be aware like this, like how, it's very much a domino effect. That is why I have no doubt that you're in the situation that you're in, you know what I mean? To share this message, which is why I wanted to have you on this podcast, to really, show women that it is possible for a guy to, number one, be self-aware, and then number two, to want to change. And that change is not something that's going to, because I think some women are like, oh, well, he's just going to change to get me back, and then he'll revert back to what he was. I think that's a fear that a lot of women have. And so explain to me and, to the listeners what it's like for you. Like when you look at all the changes that you've made and the changes that you want to make going forward and this personal development work, how are you positioning your relationship with your wife, even through this divorce, and just your feelings around like self-worth? Because I know we talked about that a little bit on the phone the other day as well. Like, getting that, hearing that she wanted a divorce, of course, affects the self-worth. And your self-worth was kind of, in a different place already prior, because you were doing something you weren't necessarily, planning on doing or felt ultimately fulfilling. So where are you at in your mindset of your self-worth in relationship to whether it's getting your wife back or whatever that future might entail or look like?
I just want to say that it took my wife so much strength and courage to come to me and ask and express that she wanted the divorce. So I know that there's a deep, long line in the sand, and I want to honor that for her. So that deep, long line in the sand really, for me, represents time, and look, I haven't been showing up for her in the way that she yearned for me to show up for 10 years, right? More 8 years, 7 years, right? So I don't expect to get the keys to the kingdom back quickly, and nor am I even ready right now. There's still a lot more work for me to do to uncover, discover, and discard, so that I can be that king, warrior, lover, leader for her that she wants, and, but I will say that, since I've made these discoveries, I've been practicing, a more deeply conscious dialogue with her. I've been practicing like really listening to her emotions as opposed to the words that are coming out of her mouth, and I can identify the emotions. And it's been such a beautiful process. I remember that one of the first times after I'd made these discoveries of like where I'd gone wrong in my relationship with her, we had this conversation about, and I could feel her anxiety. I could feel her anxiety through the phone, right? And as I'm listening to her, I'm able to identify her emotions, right? When I started to feel was like, because for the first time in our relationship, I think she felt heard, And then I got a text message afterward and she said, "It feels good when you listen to me." And I was like, wow, So I knew that I was on the right course, on the right path, and in regards to like, the healing journey in the past, like in the self-worth component, yeah, like I had never told myself that I love you before the divorce, right? So that's a practice that I'd started to do maybe 3 months ago, right? Where I'd wake up in the morning and I would say, "I love you, Tony. You're a good guy. These are good things," And in this process, like I was able to go into that 8-year-old boy, right? That 8-year-old boy that, we're in this community, feel that he needs control to have safety, right? I was able to go to that boy, right, and say, "I got you, buddy. I love you. I'm here." You don't have to have fear of abandonment today. You don't have to have, controlled prayer. Chill, play, go enjoy your life, go dream big, But by the way, thank you, for the skill sets that you've acquired, being able to read a room, because that's what's helped me be successful today, And in that daily morning process, right, I also went to that version of me of 8 months ago before my wife asked me for the divorce. And I was like, "Man, I love you. You did the best that you could, right? You did the best that you could with the knowledge that you had." And I said, "I'm sorry I didn't show up for you earlier," And with that was like how I was able to forgive myself. And from there, it like allowed me to really grow, and detach from that old version of who I was, right? And detach with love, really. And and now it's like the way that I can really understand my wife and like feel into her and in the moments, right? And I'm not talking about like, throughout the day, but in the moments as I'm talking with her, I can feel her and I can identify what she's feeling, right? And for an example, about a week ago, she called me, I was and she was calling me, she was blowing up my phone and I kept hitting, cancel, right? And finally, when I left the meeting, I texted her. I'm like, "Hey, I'll call you," because it was a pretty nasty meeting. I said, "I'll call you in 10 minutes. I need to kind of ground myself, And she says, "Call me ASAP." So I get home, I feel my feet in the ground, and I ground myself. And I feel the breath come in, and I call her. And she's like, her anxiety level was just like through the roof. And she was like, "You're getting served some divorce papers right now. They're coming right now," And I was like, "Oh, Ray, like." I identified that she was super anxious, right? I was like, "Oh, Ray, like, how are the kids? Tell me some good news. How are they doing today?" And she's like, "Oh, they're great and beautiful. We had a great morning, this and that." I was like, "Okay, so you're telling me that I'm getting served some divorce papers right now?" She's like, yes. And I was like, "Well, how about I jump on my bike and when I see them pulling up, I start to ride away and I FaceTime you while I'm doing it so I can record it and I can say, catch me if you can, motherfucker, And so she got a really good laugh out of that, And then from there, I was like, so how are you? Right? How are you? "Yeah, I'm good, Tony. It's really tough." And I'm like, "It is tough. We're going through a really difficult situation, but what's underneath that, babe? And it's just this ability to remain curious about her, because when you enter into like a relationship with somebody, you're curious, like, how tall are you? What do you like to eat? Do you like this coffee? It's like you're asking, where are you from? But what I realized, I stopped being curious about her in the moment, right? I stopped being curious about her emotions today. I stopped being curious about, where she was at, and once again, that lends to that leadership role in the family where I see today, like, women are leaving their men because they don't trust that they can lead them to that place in their heart that they yearn to go, And that's where I failed her, of like continually being curious about her, And now I realize it, and I practice this. And not only do I practice it with her, I practice it with my kids. It's allowed me to be a much better, more present father, and So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at, in the relationship with my soon to be ex-wife. It's like, I know that the divorce is going to happen. Right. But what we're given is really an opportunity to individually do the work, and I hope and pray that our higher versions can come back into union, and that's what I've only asked her in the divorce. As I was just like, just promise me that you'll see me again, like not physically, but see the man that I've become, and she says, yeah, I'm open to that. I'm open-minded, so, and I just continue to do the work, continue to, to self-improve.
Yeah. Let's go back to the signs that were probably there, because I know you mentioned earlier on, like, oh, looking back, there were subtle hints, that she was trying to share, et cetera, et cetera. So, because I mean, I'm sure you have gone and done a very thorough audit of like, both your side and probably her side, like signs that were leading up to, ultimately her coming and saying, I want a divorce. So talk about those a little bit more, because I think, the women listening are probably going to be like, oh, I could probably list like a book of things that probably right now might be reasons. So I think it would be very eye-opening to hear.
It's like, once again, I wasn't in the mindset or the awareness that I could receive those subtle hints, but, these little messages would come in, like her buying me a book, right? Hey, could you read this? Or she would, send me an email with a podcast, take the time to listen to this, and, also asking to go on a date, and it's not that I didn't want to read the book or listen to the podcast or go on the date or anything like that. And we went on dates. I'm not saying that we never went on dates. We went on dates, right? But on occasion she would ask, right? And we would go, right? Sometimes I just didn't have, I wasn't able to have the time, and these were those like little subtle hints that she was giving me, right? Where I wasn't receiving the message, where the message was coming from her heart of like, look at me, Tony. Look, I need you to read this for me. I need you to understand this podcast. This is where I'm coming from, And after the divorce, like I looked at our old text messages, I looked at our old messages on Instagram, and I saw this one that just like broke me, and this message on Instagram, it was a message and it said, praise your partner every day, and I was like, how did I miss this? How did I miss it? And these are the things that, for me have like woken me up to understand that moment by moment are these little snippets, and can either choose to take them for granted, or I can either choose to be enlivened by them, and that goes back to, how do I remain in conscious contact of the moment, so I don't miss these little subtle cues and these hints, but looking back, I can see like that was her way of saying, look at me, Tony, see me, hear me, feel me, right? Without saying it, but that's what she was communicating to me, that was her taking the leadership role because I was unaware, that was me not being a conscious leader in our relationship. So moving forward, it's like I've made a commitment, to myself, right? Like if I, the thought of being with another woman right now doesn't even cross my, the thought of like, it's like I'm so focused on, the self-growth and like, and I've allotted plenty of time to, to hopefully earn my wife's heart back, and what I wanted to say is like that I will never take another moment for granted, and I will continue on this path of like, understanding her much better in a much deeper conscious way, in a much deeper healthy way, in a deeply communicative way, in a deeply healing way, right? And once again, like other ways that she communicated to me, were when we would get into these like arguments, right? I've kind of reframed what an argument is, right? In fact, the last argument that we went into that my ex-wife and I had gotten into, she was like, oh, that last argument we got into. And I was like, oh no, that was a beautiful, intense, emotional conversation between two people that love each other, and that's really what it is, it's a triggering conversation where I'm showing her and she's showing me like where we can grow. And if you can step back and look at it from that lens, it's such a beautiful experience, right? It's such a beautiful experience where, okay, like I'm getting gifts from her in this moment where it's like, I see like my wounds that need to be healed. I see, and I'm also giving her gifts, right? And that's like the last argument that we'd gotten into, it was intense, like she said some like, really hurtful things, but I get it because that was her feminine saying, look at me, Tony, look at me. That was her feminine screaming out in pain, right? But what I'm hearing are the critical words, right? The criticism, right? And then I go to defense, right? And then I, invalidate her reality, right? By not hearing her, right? So that in itself is painful, and how everything kind of unwound for me, right? To this awareness of like, why is this happening was just so serendipitous, right? And because I pray a lot, I meditate a lot, and that night after that last argument that we'd had, and I knew that it was coming. It was, because in the divorce, she'd asked to move out of state, and this was the last night that they were in LA, right? Her and my kids. And I knew that it was coming because I could feel the tension building within her, right? Because there was fear, there was anxiety, there was all those things there, right? And, but after that argument, I was like, I need some space. I need to like, back up and like recalibrate, And as I took that space, those 2 days, like I was able to ask myself, like, why did I go to defense? Like, why do I react? Right? What is it about me that's causing this? And then it was like, boom, the light just came on, and it was just another little level of awareness that I was able to like receive of like, oh my God, like that's, that little boy in me that's like, don't leave me, love me, accept me, and that's, it was such a huge shift for me in perception, and then at the same time, like I was talking to my mom, and my mom's this, beautiful, spiritual, religious woman. And it was so funny. It was so funny. I was talking to my mom and I was like telling her everything like this and that, and she, was like, her response was, she was, well, why don't you just, do this and pray more or something? And I was like, Mom, I just need you to listen to me. And I was like, oh, I get it. Where I was able to witness in real time, like my mom she was trying to help me out of the goodness of her heart by fixing my situation, right? But then I was like, oh, that's what my wife must have felt like, right? By me always trying to fix her and not hearing what's underneath, what she's trying to communicate to me, which is always like an invitation to grow, right? That's what she was always trying to communicate to me. And it may not have come out, in her language, but it definitely came out in the emotion, and I just wasn't able to be at that place where I could understand it until now, and once again, it's like, I practice these things now, and there's still a lot of love in my relationship with her. There's still, and we still laugh a lot, it's like, and I get to a place where I feel that, yeah, she feels safer, but once again, I'm not going in there to like get the keys to the kingdom yet. I want to honor her space and time for her growth, so yeah, I mean that, those were like the subtle hints that I was unable to like see, right? And those looking back, like those are the painful ones, the painful ones where it's like, I asked myself, like, how can I not get that? How did I not notice that? And there's no excuse for it. There really is no excuse, as I give an excuse, which is I was just so focused on providing, right? I bought into the societal norms of like, this is what a man's supposed to do. You're supposed to do this, this, and this. You do this, this, and this, and then you're going to have a happy life. Okay, cool. That's what I'm going to do. There was no elder, right, that said, that talked to me about yin and yang or Shakti and Shiva, or there was no, elder man that introduced me to this concept. There was no rite of passage into manhood for me. There was no teachings that I could understand this. Like, I had to go through the pain to be like, wait a second, where did I go wrong? What did I miss? Right. And looking back, it's like, I realized like this had to happen. This had to happen for me to wake up in this specific way, and I even told my ex-wife, I'm like, you'll never have to say you're sorry, for this, because the gift that I've received is everything that I've been looking for, everything. Because as a young boy, it's like, and I'm sure, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but like for me, like I had this vision of what marriage was going to be like, and it wasn't some fairy tale. It was based in reality, but it was beautiful. It was a beautiful relationship, right? And that's what I always wanted, but I didn't realize that a lot of that was contingent on how I was showing up, right? In this very deeply connected, deeply intimate way where I thought like, oh, we have this, we connect, we're intimate, we have fun, but it wasn't to the layers that I needed to go, right? I needed to go a couple of more layers to be that king and warrior and lover and leader that she needed, So that's the work.
100%. Absolutely. Do you think there is any way, because I know that women are probably thinking of this, like, could there have been another way that she could have communicated to you that there were issues that would have led to the same result without mentioning the word divorce? Because divorce feels very much nail in coffin, very much like, oh my gosh, the world is falling down on me and like life, my reality is, coming to a collapse, which is also partially, probably why she used that word, because she felt that all the other actions that she was taking were not yielding any results, right? But do you think, looking back and understanding her as you are understanding her and seeing her now, that there could have been another way she could have brought it up without using the word divorce to get the same result?
The code to be cracked. You know what I'm saying? It's like I've thought about that, and I look on the feed, on TikTok, and it's like 60% of them say that, like how why is it always too late for men? Like, I'm trying to communicate to this and he doesn't get it, But for me personally, like the way because I loved her and I still love her very much, right? And if she would have come to me and said, Tony, I'm struggling. I need this from you. I need you to, show up for me in this way. But very logically, right? Where it's like, when I say this and you do this, this is how I feel, right? When I say this and you react this way from your childhood wound, this is how I feel. Oh God, is that what's happening? Oh my God. Like that's probably how I would have reacted, right? And once again, like she did the best that she could, right? She did the best that she could, and my actions gave her no other option than the option that she took, and I can accept that, right? And I can accept that she did the best that she could, I would have preferred a warning, you know what I'm saying? But she was giving those little subtle hint warnings, you know what I'm saying? So for her, yes, she did make suggestions. I just wasn't receiving them, but that is like, that's what I'm trying to like wrap my head around as well. It's like, what could she have said, or in other relationships, like what can a woman do to communicate to her husband, right? And for me, it's like, I loved her. Her happiness was like so important to me. Her well-being was so important to me. So if she sat me down and looked me in the eyes and was like, Tony, I'm struggling. I need this from you. I would have been like, okay, cool. My partner who I love is hurting. How can I help her? And
well, I love that you just said, like, her wording specifically was I need, because I think and I'm, because I see this all the time, even in the women that I coach, and I'm assuming a lot of these women that you saw in your TikTok comments, when they go to their partner and they express hurt, it comes off as an attack. And I'm guessing that if your wife had come to you and been like, well, you're doing XYZ wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, you probably would have been like, well, screw you. Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? It would have been like an attack versus like her coming to you and asking for help is basically what she did. And that's what I tell all of my coaching clients. And I've had many podcasts here that's like, that communication with your man cannot be seen as emasculating, because if you go on attack mode, he's just going to shut down and he's going to be like, okay, well, clearly I'm the problem. I don't know how I'm supposed to help you, because she doesn't want help, which is so hard because the women want help, but they don't realize that how they're communicating is not helpful. So I love that you, like, the way you worded that specifically was so like, yeah, I mean, if you're a woman and you want your man to, if you want to improve the relationship, it's like, you're presenting yourself as like, can you help me with this problem?
yes, yeah, because within that dynamic of that relationship, the male partner is probably going to defense, is invalidating their reality, is unable to really like see the depths of what she's communicating to him, right? So, if the feminine, if the female can come in a very logical way, and say like, I need this from you, and when this happens, I feel this way, I'm not attacking you, at all. I'm just coming to you from a place of like, this is what I need, right? But, I would lead into it with like, honey, I'm so grateful that you're going out there and you're busting your ass for our family. We're so grateful, because men need words, right? And my ex-wife did this on occasion, and I'm telling you, like, when those words of affirmation came out, it's like okay, like I can go to anything right now. You know what I'm saying? Because that love comes through. That love is like, that's what every man like lives for. Like if, if my ex-wife would have come to me every day, and I'm not saying she needed to, but she would have come to me every day and been like, Tony, like you're our king. I love you. You're showing up for our family. You're doing great, right? But I need this from you. I'd have been like, you got it, babe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, because on the flip side, there is a way to communicate with the masculine that is comprehensible,
Absolutely.
And it's with words of affirmation, because every man dreams of their wife or their partner saying like, you're my king, go out there and crush it. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
For what you're doing for us, and that, I mean, even just like hearing myself say them enlivens me, but to have your lover, your, you know what I'm saying? Like your most intimate partner say that to you once a month, you're golden, it's not like it needs to happen on a regular basis. But if that happens once a month, you will see, because we all want to be loved, right? We all want to be cherished, right? And I guarantee you, like it allows me the strength and the nobility to like start to open up, right? And understand like, okay, like, my responsibility is much bigger here, but yeah, I can imagine a life where, hopefully my ex-wife will be my future wife would say that to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and, from a woman's perspective, it's so tricky because, going back to that, very subconscious, very societal, passive expectation of what men are supposed to be really has like got us all like effed up on another level, because it's like that very robotic perspective of like, oh, well, he's supposed to, like he's supposed to be a robot and he's supposed to provide and he's supposed to be sugar daddy or whatever it might be. And then the women are just like, okay, and the men are over here like, hello, could you just like see me for something other than like the money that I provide you, and then, or like the duties around the house or like taking out the garbage, it's like, yeah, those things are great and they're very important and they're very necessary, but there's more to a man than that. And women are very I think, resistant on a very subconscious level to that, because it means that they would have to hold space for someone else other than themselves. And it's already hard enough for them to hold space for themselves. And so being able to hold somebody else's emotions when they probably already don't even know how to process their own emotions is like question mark, and so I feel like there's this very natural friction that leads to women being able to being unable to communicate with men in a healthy way, like how we're talking about and how you listed examples here. And it's really like, okay, how do we as women understand ourselves and our own emotions so that we can hold space for somebody else? Because for whatever reason, we can hold it for our children, but we can't hold it for our partner. That doesn't make any sense. Like it just doesn't make any sense, but it's also totally unfair. So what can we do to fix it and alleviate it so that, ultimately the divorce doesn't happen, right? Like that is, I think the goal is that women are able to understand themselves, men are able to understand both themselves and women are able to do vice versa, and to be able to come together and communicate, regularly. It's interesting because my husband is, he's going through a lot of his own work, very similar to how you're doing yourself. And one thing that he kind of keeps seeing in his circle is, it comes up often that the suggestion is not to communicate with your wife, like what your struggles are, or if you're working through something. And he told me that the other day, and I thought, really? I'm like, that's really interesting. But he said, for most men, their women would not be able to understand the depth of the struggle, and it would come across as like, well, you're incompetent. So I think that's why there's like suggestions not to share. And I thought that's really sad because think about it. If you're, I like to think about it from a mothering perspective. Like if my son, who was, even if he was 14 or say he was like 21, came to me and had an emotional, identity crisis or like a struggle or whatever, I would want to be able to hold space for him and not think any less of him because of that. So how come women struggle to hold space for men if they're struggling or going through something, identity likewise? And so I kind of got really sad when, it's 100% a valid, like I know where that guidance was coming from, but it just made me really sad because I just thought, why are we as women so, and a lot of this is cultural, like F the patriarchy, like all this stuff. It's just like men are evil, period. But I'm like, okay, but there's a lot of really incredible men, yourself included. Like by labeling it all and classifying it all as one umbrella, we're not able to, we as women are literally pushing away exactly what we,
Yes. And that rings so true to me because of what I was going through actually before this all, where I was actually contemplating that, and once again, I feel it goes to this really lands with the conscious leadership component, where in a relationship we do have a responsibility for one another, and how we communicate, and because what I'm going through now is a really intense exit of this business partnership that I've had, right? It's intense, it's scary, it's because I'm dealing with some pretty toxic people, so I have to be very, very, I have to like pay close attention to all the paperwork that's coming in, and I don't really thrive in that environment very well, and I wanted to share it with my wife. I wanted to share it with my ex-wife. I wanted her to like have space for me to be like, look, this is what I'm at. Like, I'm fucking scared right now. Like, because this is a big decision that's going to affect everybody, you included and our kids, and I feel the weight of this decision, and I realized like, oh, wow, that is like me asking her to hold space for me and her masculine as I come to her from my, in-depth intuitive feminine, right? There was this, it's really a request, well, let's change, see me, right? Hold space for me, I need strength, right? In that moment, I need it from you, right? And it was just this, wow, I realized that, I didn't send her that text, I didn't, because I prayed and I meditated. I'm like, okay, I'm okay. It's going to be fine, But going back to like what, your husband and his men's group, they discuss, it's like, I can see that, I feel it, right? Like, would she understand, the depths of, this stress? I don't know. Do I want to share it? Like, you go have a beautiful day with our kids. Like, I don't want to burden you with like what me as a man I have to brace, right? Or do I ask her to hold a safe space for me? Hey, babe, I need. Can you hold a safe space for me? I'm struggling, And if the invitation is accepted, then I can come to her, right? And that's just the awareness of like the polarity, right? It's just the awareness of like, I need to come to you with something that's like scaring me, and that's me being conscious of my feminine, right? And
Absolutely.
asking her to like, I need you to step into your masculine for a little bit for me to hold this space, And it's a beautiful concept, right? And it's one
Absolutely.
that I try to explore, because it literally hit me this morning as I was like hitting, kind of stressed out about this stuff. And it's like, I wanted to share it. How do I do that? How do I do that in a healthy way? Right.
Yeah.
And it's
absolutely.
Like, so that's kind of it, it's like, and I feel like most men are deep down too afraid to share that kind of stuff.
Oh, 100%. They're way too afraid. Yeah.
That vulnerability isn't there. And it's like, there's this like concept of stoicism. Let me, let me hold on to this. I got it. Now I'm going to be firm, strong. Right. And it's that, if it works for you, great. For me, it's like, I need to let it out. I need to communicate, right? I need to, let it move through me, right? Let it move through, and that's, going back to like even attunement, right? Where I practice like deeply connecting with my ex-wife, and really it's about looking at her through my heart, and being centered in my body and not being in my mind, because my mind is where things get a little haywire, because I have this unsatisfiable self-seeking thing here, right? That causes most of the problems, right? But if I'm here, my heart, like I'm good, and that's the hardest distance to travel, right? Is to drop from here into this thing, right? And when I'm in this thing, it's like, I feel so much more, right? And what I was getting into with the concept of attunement, it's like, I wish that I could go back, and identify like hey babe, you're angry at something, if it's at me, I'm here. Like, if you need to pound on my chest. If you need to take a bath, take a bath. If you need to scream into a pillow, scream into a pillow. But I'm here. I'm here to be a witness. Right? I'm not going in there. But let's move this through you so that it doesn't, take you out.
Yeah.
And it's,
go ahead. Finish.
And it's the same thing with me of like, I have this stress. I need to move it through me. Right? I need to move this fear through me. Right? Please have that safe container for me, to do that. Right? So it goes both ways,
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because there's a couple of things that you mentioned there that I was like, oh, I have idea that came up. I want to talk about that. So going back to, a woman's inability to hold space for her man comes down to this cultural idea that it's a competition, that somehow if a woman holds space for a man's pain, that it invalidates her own pain, and that it's this competitive nature. And that's what, again, patriarchy, everything, it really ultimately comes down to is that if a man is struggling, that it therefore undermines a woman's struggle because a woman has had it more quote unquote difficult. And don't at me for people that are listening for using quotes there. And I always tell all my listeners, like, if you're starting to feel uncomfortable, keep listening. Because it's, that it's just so crazy to me that someone's pain could be placed on a hierarchy system over somebody else's. And I'm like, it's really not about that whatsoever. And I feel like if you're a woman who is feeling discomfort, even at the thought of hearing, like if you think about your partner telling you their problems and you're like, it's not about you, blah, blah, or you start to feel that like, what about me? I haven't, like, because you don't have someone to listen to your own pain, then it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Take a step back. Like, let's just go to the whiteboard for a split second. Because, if you're feeling that level of discomfort and you're really feeling that intensity of not being seen and heard, then it's a matter of, great, I have work to do. It doesn't mean that my partner's pain and struggle is not worthy of being shared or listened or heard to. It just means that I also have something that needs to be seen, heard, and listened to, also by yourself. So it's, just like, it's something that I think, I'm constantly working on, the women that I coach, they're just like, oh shoot, like, as soon as we talk about this discussion of communicating and like understanding the men's side, they're like, and I'm like, listen, this is not coming from a place of shame. Like, you shouldn't feel shameful. And they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like, I had no idea that, number one, this was an area that I had to work on. And number two, that I was even really talking this way. And number three, that I was rejecting my partner and doing so. Like, we're all just little wounded children that want love and attention and hugs from everyone. And when you think about it in that context, let the world, like, all hurt people are just little wounded children in grown-up bodies. It makes so much more sense. And it's like, you don't get to invalidate another little child's wounds. Like, you would never do that to your own children. And so, having that perspective is so key. And I think, just a call out for the one that are listening, that like, if your partner is struggling, or maybe you invite them to communicate that with you, and I dare you to not judge them for doing so, because it's like one of the best exercises you could probably do if you're a woman. And also if you're a guy, if maybe you need to ask your partner just to say, hey, listen, can you hold space for me? We're going to start this practice exercise where maybe once a week, we're both going to share something and then literally just like hug after, period. That's it. There's no other words. There's no other, like, no judgment, no nothing. It's not fixing. It's not whatever. It's just like, great, we're just going to listen and hold space for each other. Dunzo, great. And it's going to probably bring so much closeness to the relationship just because there's no judgment. There's, you're able to hold space. But also going back to what you were talking about with regards to, your brain and your body. So, and this is something I have brought into my coaching that and I've actually done a podcast episode on this. I'm why a lot of people don't get as many results from therapy as they would like to, because therapy is all in the mind and it's not brought into the body. And I tell almost every single one of my clients, get into somatic therapy, get into nervous system regulation, get into the body, because like, and I love that you're explaining how for you, you feel peace and wholeness and alignment when you're in your heart and in your body. And it is really, really, really important. And this is something my husband has discovered as well. He was like, honestly, he's like, I was so in my head that I didn't know how to like even experience emotion, because I was so in my head from wounds prior that I couldn't even really like see you or feel you or whatever, because I didn't know how to. It's like being stuck in a prison that you don't know how to get out of. Like, you've lived there your whole life, you're stuck there. And for women, it's so important because, like, in today's society, most women are in their masculine, and it's like just going and doing and doing and thinking and trying to think your way into a solution, and it just doesn't work. And so women come to me with anxiety or, inability to feel and all this stuff. And I'm like, you haven't targeted your body. Like, your body's the missing. And that was my experience as well. It wasn't until I brought my body onto the healing journey with me that I was like, oh, so this is what it's like to actually live life. I felt like the wool had been pulled from my eyes. And I was like, what the heck? Like, how was I even really living a life? Because this is actually what living is supposed to be like, with emotion, with pain, with harmony between the body and the mind. And of course, I need my brain to think. It's how this podcast came about, but it's also so important to feel through and to be able to give. And that's where you're able to hold space. And like, it totally changed my relationship with my children and my relationship with myself. And like, I wouldn't even be able to coach if I didn't have a connection with my body and with my soul and with my heart. And so I love that you just brought that distinction between, being in your mind and being in your body, because it's still like such a very ignored form of therapy, but you 100% need to have both. And ultimately, I think if you're someone who really wants to get to a healed place, you do have to consider, like, how is your body responding? Are you even paying attention to what your body is telling you? One of my clients, she got on our call and she was like, yeah, she's like, yeah, my throat's really hurting. And I was like, oh, that's actually really interesting because your throat center is defined in human design. I said, that's actually a really common sign that you're out of alignment. And she was like, oh my gosh. And so we audited basically her entire like last 2 to 4 weeks. And sure enough, her body is telling her like, there's something here that you actually need to address because it's an unsolved problem that needs to be solved. And so our bodies are like, anyone would have just been like, okay, take some pain medicine. When is this going to go away? And then we'll get right back to our regular scheduled programming. And I'm like, no. Like our bodies are literally responding to what needs to be worked through. So it's so, and I'm like, of course I had so many health problems. I was not listening to my body, like ultimately of what it needed. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. I mean, and embodiment is huge, for men and women.
Yes.
And you mentioned breath work and you mentioned ice baths and look, yeah, you have to like, for me, and how I came about this was after she'd asked for the divorce, like my body went in, like I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep.
Yep.
Just like
totally disconnected. Yeah.
What's going on? Like it took me about 90 days to like feel my feet. Okay, I've landed, right? And in that time, like I was so afraid to like go be with her, right? When I had to pick up the kids or when I had to go drop something off, like I parked outside the house and I prayed and meditated, for 5 minutes before I could go in because I needed to understand like it's okay, right? It's okay. And then I started to take ice baths, right? And then I started to do Kundalini yoga. Then I started to do deep squats, right? These, are we still connected?
Oh no, you're so good.
Yeah. So I started to do these deep squats, right? I started to do these practices that were putting my body through stress, right? I needed to put my body through stress so that I could understand like, okay, what can my body handle, right? And now with that, putting my body, like this morning, I took a cold shower, like cold shower, and I breathed through it, right? It's like, I'm putting my body through that stress to practice. That's it, to practice for what's going to come at me throughout the day, and
yeah, you're training your body to hold discomfort.
Yes. Yeah. To hold discomfort. So then, because that allows me to stay here in my heart, right? Because once I shoot up to my brain, that's when I like,
all the voices come in.
Yes. Right. So I stay in my heart. I feel my feet. I feel my breath, and I practice this. And this is what allows me to be attuned to my ex-wife, when we're together, right? It allows me to like see her, feel her in a much deeper level, and, but it's getting into that body first and feeling that I'm here, feel my feet on the ground. I can feel that breath going to my diaphragm, right? Which allows me to be just in the moment, present, and able to like receive her, say we an emotional storm, this intense conversation that's very triggering, right? Like I don't have to react because I'm here. I feel you, right? And it's like that is the foundation for which I'm able to communicate with her deeply, right? To listen to, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's literally, there's so many women that are like, oh, well, I have, even thinking about communicating with my partner kind of sends me into an anxiety attack. And I'm like, we need to regulate you because you're so dysregulated that, the thought of going and doing something, I mean, that's literally the definition of anxiety, in my opinion, is like just dysregulation on a much deeper level. And so I'm like, okay, let's start incorporating some somatic work so that you can go forward and do this really important work that you're going to have to do, because communicating should be easy, even if it's a very, very difficult subject. And I mean, somatic work, literally, like, in my opinion, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for somatic work. I mean, somatic work is like, it's insane. Literally so powerful.
Yeah, no. I completely agree. And it's like the foundation. And I check in pretty regularly with my body throughout the day. At one point, I used to have a rubber band on my wrist, and I would flip it. Once I realized I was coming into my head, I would flip that rubber band. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm in my body. I'm here.
That's really smart.
I'm here. I am now.
Yeah.
It's like Ram Dass. It's like I'm living awareness.
Right. Yep. And totally. Yep. Yeah. Amazing. So is there anything else that you would, or you feel like is really pertinent to the women that are listening, or say they're listening to it with their husbands? Because sometimes, I have my coaching clients that like love to listen to the podcast with their husbands and their partners in their car. Is there anything that you feel like is pertinent that we haven't mentioned already to, couples or women or whoever that you feel like is going to be really important to kind of avoid a divorce?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Something that I had thought about in my relationship where I had also kind of missed the cues, but also I was successful at inadvertently, my wife and I did have like amazing intimate moments, right? Was it enough for her to sustain, a healthy marriage, for her definition? Obviously no, right? But one thing that I remember is we would try and like plan sex nights. Like, okay, it's going to be this Saturday, right? And for me, it felt like so robotic. Do you know what I'm saying? But look, we have 3 kids and businesses to run and bills to pay, so I get it, But I remember in one of these occasions, I was like, oh God, and once again, I was in a place where I couldn't communicate that to her, But what I did was I was like, I'm gonna flirt with her all day, And it's really just like this idea of foreplay all day. It's like I would just, go up and give her these sensual hugs and kisses and smell her, right? And look, my relationship with her wasn't abusive. It wasn't anything, it's like there was no infidelity, anything like that. It was just misaligned energy, right? And we had a lot of these beautiful moments, and there was moments where I was in touch with her, right? But the most of the time I wasn't, So, and I remember this specific day, it's like, I could feel like that sexual energy building throughout the day. Right. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, I'm just going to flirt with her all day. That was the thought that came to my head, that's what I'm going to do. Right. But what I'm doing is like, looking back, I'm like, oh, I was able to like build that like sexual energy throughout the day to get to that point where we made love at night. And it was just this, amazing love session, right? That we were both waiting for us to get to, and it was just electrifying, and, it's like, once again, it's like, now that I know these things, it's like, I want to give it to her, it's like, I want to give her this version of me because she's been waiting for it, and time will tell, and if anything, like, it's like, I hope that men can like hear this, right? And understand these little subtle cues that our partners are giving us, right? They're giving us throughout our relationship, these subtle cues that we can look at an argument as an intensely emotional, chaotic storm that's triggering, right? But with these subtle gifts to grow, I mean, that's the invitation, right? It's like, I go back, and once again, it's like, I look at her as an architect of my spiritual growth, right? Because we were mirroring each other. Like sometimes, like, our wounds are only visible in a relationship, right? Because they reveal themselves in that space, right? So it's like, am I in a place where I can look at that, And if I, because that's the invitation, that's what she's shown, and that's what your feminine partner is showing you, and it's vice versa, as you know. So it's like, are we willing to like, okay, see this? I mean, I am now, but I didn't know how, right? 8, 9 months. But yeah, I hope men can like understand these subtle cues, right? And it's as small as it seemed to me, right? It was the world, right? As small as little posts. I mean, when I saw that post, it said, praise your partner every day. It crushed my heart, because I was like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? She was asking me to do that,
Yeah.
And it's like, I get it. I get it,
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I think that, what you mentioned about the intimacy, I mean, there's, I think it's that, looking back, it's really such an essential part to men, right? And a lot of women, women go back and forth about like, oh, because if they're dysregulated, then they can't handle physical touch. And then it's a whole like self-implosion side of things. But there's a lot of women that they'll flip-flop because they'll be like, oh, I want that. And they want intimacy, but then they don't want to open up emotionally. And so ultimately, like what I love about what you did is you showed that she was wanted ultimately. And that is what opens up the doors to more, because she feels wanted, she feels desired. And those are so essential to a woman's core. Even if she is in her masculine state, that's still something that she inherently wants. And so 100%. And I think that, the foreplay side of things and the flirting side of things are very misunderstood is one word, and then also just forgotten about. They are very, very forgotten about, which is why women are obsessed with like Pride and Prejudice because it goes into all like the little nuances. And I think why so many women are obsessed with the Regency era, because it's like the little touches, the little, all the little things build up to something bigger. And it definitely feels like a lost art for sure. But there isn't a guidebook for men, in men's defense, like there's no guidebook on flirting. There's no guidebook on like, this is how you woo a woman. Like there really isn't, unless you happen, I don't know, you had a good guy friend who like, I don't know, you were in a good men's circle, like who could share that information. You wouldn't know how to do that. So it's always about like, okay, let's the intent and then the communication, or like asking her what she wants. Like those are all just really important things that I think are, like you're saying, like notice the cues, notice the little signs. And I mean, the same goes for women too. I think it's just like being able to hold space for yourself, hold space for the other person, open up the door to communicate, and learning how to communicate. I think it is just so key, in my opinion, of at least my little tidbit of like, how divorce can be prevented for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask you like, what do you think about, the dark and light feminine energies and how they kind of manifest in relationships?
Well, I think it really depends on, like, are you talking about like the dark feminine? Is that what you're referencing? Okay. So it's actually kind of funny because 2 episodes ago, I was talking about masculine versus feminine energy, and I didn't really get into it much because dark feminine it's kind of like a sibling to wounded masculine energy, which is really just like, she, and in some way, like she gets really angry and she gets very isolated to the point where it's like there's nobody that she can trust. And so she lashes out in anger, because women who are in their wounded feminine are seeking to feel something, because emotions are not safe for them. So they're seeking to feel something, and usually it comes out in like extreme jealousy, extreme isolation, extreme wounded communication. Nobody's good enough for her. Everyone is basically like a failure, essentially. And she's very, like, she makes herself into this like empress, but not a good one, because she's doing it as a means of self-protection. And so it becomes this very, very unhealthy, because she'll fall off that bandwagon too. Like and I've experienced this because in some ways it actually feels a little bipolar, because you'll have these episodes where you'll lash out and it feels like you're whipping someone. Literally, that's what it feels like. And you don't even recognize yourself, and you don't even like that it's happening, but you don't have a choice. Like you have to do this because you need to protect yourself, because you've experienced wounding on such an intense level that to do anything, there is no other option, because to be open would just to put you in a position where you could be wounded again. So the dark feminine is very like, I feel a lot of empathy for women that are experiencing that. And it's unfortunately somewhat glorified on TikTok, because it's like, oh, in the dating world, like you wanna like act like you don't need a man. And I'm like, that's a load of shit. Women need men 100%. And I said, and you shouldn't be afraid to show that you do need someone. Like that's there. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you more empowered, knowing that you do need masculine energy. You do need a strength. Like that's not a bad thing. And so women are really, in my opinion, women who are so wounded to the point where, this very, I hate to use the word bitchy, but that's unfortunately kind of what it is. It's a very bitchy, like, oh, you can't fuck with me type of attitude and mindset. really they actually shut down almost the entire core of who they actually truly are. And they mold themselves into this like really like, you can't fuck with me, like I'm the best kind of attitude, which that facade will eventually come down. Whether it's 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, who knows? But it will eventually come down because you can't maintain the kind of energy that's not you at your core, or it'll manifest in health problems, or you'll end up getting cancer, or you'll end up with something because you just can't maintain a persona that is not ultimately you. And so I really just feel empathy for them because it's really, and I mean, I've had a couple clients who, have that what we call like alter persona, where they're like, I just get really mean and I get really bitchy and I get really like, I go on attack mode and I don't like it. And I'm like, okay, well, we have to address the core wound because you don't feel safe. And so that other person has to come out and protect you because you don't feel safe. You don't feel safe in your emotions. You don't feel safe being vulnerable. You don't feel safe being open. You don't feel safe discovering somebody new and discovering the person who's ultimately on the inside of you. And so it is really beautiful to watch it unfold, but it can be really painful because women are, like they've created this alter persona in order to live and what they thought was going to help them thrive. And it turns out it just ends up giving them more pain and frustration. Yeah. So I don't know if that clarifies like what you were, kind of wanting to learn about it. Yeah. And usually women who are in their dark feminine are 100%. For the most part, it really depends because there are some women in their dark feminine who definitely still get things handed to them on a silver platter, and which is also so kind of funny to me because that's definitely like a healed feminine trait, but they kind of do it in a very arrogant way, and that's not really healthy because then you're kind of like, it's a matter of pride, and that's not really something like the healed feminine is not really prideful. Like she knows who she is and she's very confident in who she is, but she's not pushing that on other people versus the dark feminine is. It's like that need to be seen and be validated. It's like that's her work, right? Like she's constantly seeking, I need more validation, more visibility, more like everyone needs to give me their attention, this very like I have to be the center of attention. And it just is a very dark hole of addiction that just women end up in. And so they end up working, like kind of tripping over themselves to be seen, and it just ends up being so exhausting. And so they're very heavily in a non-healthy masculine state because they're doing all this work, but it's not actually getting them. It might get them more attention, but it's not a lasting thing, right? It doesn't give their soul anything. It's a fleeting thing that just keeps disappearing, and so they have to do more work to get it. And so it's this very never-ending perpetual cycle. Yeah. So awesome. Well, it was amazing talking about all this, and I really hope that whoever's listening got some massive, massive takeaways. So tell us if people want to follow you and learn more about your journey and your information, where they can follow you.
Yeah, so I'm on TikTok. It's called The Awakened Mindset. And and I'm currently building out a course right now to help men understand their feminine partners better. And that should be launching pretty soon. And that's at The Awakened Mindset. As I continue on this journey and make more self-discoveries, it's like I want to like help prevent divorce. It's like if I can find a way to get to the men before it's too late, and help like consciously awaken that to like, look, this is what's going on. Like I would love to do that, And so yeah, that's it. That's it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully those that will listen will go follow you on TikTok. And thanks for joining me today.
Cool. No, thank you so much, Miriam. I really, really appreciate it. It was great.
Thank you so much for listening and or watching today's episode of Awaken the Feminine Within. If you are in a relationship and you're finding yourself really frustrated with your relationship or your partner and you're wanting to improve and you want to hold space for yourself, you want to have a healthy relationship, you want to build something really incredible and really beautiful, but you know that journey starts with you, then schedule a consultation with me. All consultations are free. So you get a free 30 minutes where we get to chat and talk. And also get on the wait list because in a couple weeks, we are opening the group collective, which is a group coaching. It's only limited to 5 women. And I'm going to be opening that up on September 26th. So if you're not on the list for that, There's huge VIP discounts that come with the first 24 hours of those women that sign up. So you get like an extra month for free, an extra one-on-one calls with me and all that good stuff. So if you're not already signed up, definitely get on our email list, which is going to be on our website, awakenthefeminine.com. All that information is going to be down below. Share this with a friend. If you know someone, or if you know, you can share it with your husband. Listen to this podcast with him. If you know of other men that are struggling or women that are struggling in their marriage and you're like, hey, just, maybe listen to this with your partner and see what happens. Like, definitely do that. That is 100% going to help. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Go follow Tony, and I will talk to you in the next episode.